The question, what is truth, has echoed through the corridors of history for millennia. It's a question that challenges the very foundation of our understanding, our beliefs, and our actions. Philosophers have debated it, scientists have sought it through empirical methods, and ordinary people grapple with it in their daily lives. Is truth something solid and unchanging, or is it fluid and dependent on perspective? This fundamental inquiry is not merely an academic exercise. It profoundly impacts how we navigate the world, make moral judgments, and build societies. The search for truth is an inherent part of the human experience, a deep-seated desire to align our minds with reality itself. Without a reliable concept of truth, we are adrift in a sea of subjectivity, unable to distinguish fact from fiction, right from wrong. This age-old question was famously posed by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, to Jesus Christ just hours before his crucifixion. Standing before the Roman prefect, Jesus had just declared, "For this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Pilate's cynical retort, "What is truth?" hangs heavy in the historical account. Did he ask out of genuine curiosity, or was it a dismissive shrug from a man accustomed to the shifting sands of political expediency? Whatever his motive, his question highlights a critical juncture where divine truth encountered human skepticism and power. The trial of Jesus itself became a theatre where truth was distorted, denied, and ultimately condemned by those who preferred darkness to light. The context of Pilate's question is deeply ironic. He stood face to face with the one who claimed to be the embodiment of truth, yet he seemingly failed to recognize it, or perhaps chose to ignore it for political reasons. This encounter serves as a powerful illustration of humanity's often conflicted relationship with truth. We claim to value it, yet we frequently find it inconvenient, challenging, or even threatening to our established beliefs, desires, or power structures. The pursuit of truth requires intellectual honesty, courage, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. It demands that we examine evidence critically and follow it where it leads, even if it means abandoning cherished notions or facing opposition. Understanding the nature of truth is therefore not just a philosophical pastime, but a vital necessity. It shapes our worldview, guides our decisions, and forms the basis for justice and trust. If truth is merely a personal preference or a social construct, then there can be no objective standard for anything, from scientific claims to moral principles. The implications are staggering. How can we hold anyone accountable if there's no objective truth about their actions? How can we learn from history if there's no true account of past events? The quest for truth, therefore, is a quest for the very bedrock of meaningful existence and coherent understanding. It's a journey that requires diligence, discernment, and an open heart to recognize it when we find it. The ordeal of Jesus began in the dead of night, a setting that itself seemed to symbolize the darkness attempting to extinguish the light of truth. After his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was first taken to Annas. Annas was the former high priest, but still wielded immense influence. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the current high priest. This initial hearing before Annas was legally irregular. It wasn't an official session of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, but rather a preliminary private interrogation designed to find or manufacture charges against Jesus. The aim was clear: to build a case, however flimsy, that could be presented to the Roman authorities for a death sentence, as the Sanhedrin under Roman rule lacked the authority to execute capital punishment. During this clandestine meeting, Annas questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teachings. Jesus' response was straightforward and bold. He stated, "I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said." This was a direct challenge to the secretive and unjust nature of the proceedings. Jesus appealed to the public record of his teachings, highlighting that his message was open for all to scrutinize. He was essentially pointing out that if there were any legitimate accusations, witnesses should have been readily available to testify about his public ministry, not sought through a shadowy pre-dawn interrogation. interrogation. The response to Jesus' truthful and logical defense was not a reasoned counter-argument or an examination of evidence. Instead, one of the officials standing nearby struck Jesus in the face, saying, "Is this the way you answer the high priest?" This act of violence was a stark illustration of how those in power often resort to force when confronted with uncomfortable truths they cannot refute through legitimate means. The physical blow was a clear violation of any semblance of just procedure. A prisoner, especially one yet to be formally charged or convicted, should not be subjected to such abuse. It exposed the prejudice and malice driving the interrogation from its very outset, demonstrating a blatant disregard for fairness and due process. Annas, unable to secure any self-incriminating statement or concrete charge from Jesus, then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. This first phase of the trial set the stage for what was to follow, a series of hearings marked by illegalities, false witnesses, and a predetermined agenda to condemn Jesus. The truth of Jesus' identity and mission was not the subject of genuine inquiry. Rather, it was the inconvenient obstacle that his accusers sought to suppress and distort. The initial encounter with Annas revealed that the path to the cross would be paved with falsehoods and injustice, a stark contrast to the very truth Jesus embodied and proclaimed throughout his ministry. Following the irregular interrogation by Annas, Jesus was brought before Caiaphas, the high priest, and the assembled Sanhedrin. This was supposed to be the official religious trial, but it too was riddled with violations of Jewish law and procedure, demonstrating a desperate attempt to legitimize a predetermined verdict. According to Jewish law, capital trials were not to be held at night, yet this assembly convened before dawn. Furthermore, a verdict of condemnation in a capital case could not be reached on the same day as the trial. A period of reflection was required. However, the urgency to eliminate Jesus before the Passover festival led the Sanhedrin to trample over its own legal traditions, sacrificing justice for expediency. The prosecution struggled immensely to find credible evidence. The Gospels report that the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. This admission is striking. The highest religious court was actively seeking false evidence, not objective truth. The witnesses who did come forward contradicted each other, their testimonies failing to align, which under Jewish law should have led to their dismissal and even punishment. The very foundation of the case was built on a desperate search for lies that could stick, a clear indication that the truth about Jesus' actions and teachings offered no grounds for condemnation. Eventually, two witnesses came forward twisting Jesus' words about destroying the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days. They distorted his metaphorical statement about his own body, his death and resurrection, into a literal threat against the physical temple, a charge of sacrilege. Even then, Mark's Gospel notes that their testimonies did not agree. Frustrated by the lack of a coherent case based on these falsehoods, Caiaphas took a direct approach. He put Jesus under oath, a solemn and binding adjuration, demanding, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." This was a critical moment, forcing Jesus to respond to the central question of his identity. Jesus' reply was unequivocal. "You have said so, but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." He affirmed his messianic identity and divinity. Upon hearing this, Caiaphas tore his robes, a dramatic gesture, and declared Jesus guilty of blasphemy, exclaiming, "Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" The Sanhedrin immediately condemned him as worthy of death. The truth they had sought was not an objective assessment, but a confession that could be twisted into a capital offense. His own truthful affirmation of his divine nature became the very basis for his condemnation by those who refused to accept that truth. Having condemned Jesus for blasphemy, a religious charge, the Sanhedrin faced a problem. They needed Roman approval to carry out a death sentence. Blasphemy was not a capital crime under Roman law. Therefore, when they brought Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, they had to invent new charges, political ones, that would concern Rome. They accused Jesus of subverting the nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar and claiming to be a king. These were deliberate falsehoods designed to paint Jesus as a political revolutionary. and a threat to Roman authority, a stark distortion of his actual teachings, which included render to Caesar what is Caesar's. The truth of Jesus' mission was being systematically twisted to fit a narrative that would ensure his execution. Pilate, an experienced Roman politician, likely saw through the flimsy accusations. His initial examination of Jesus led him to declare, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." This was a moment where truth could have prevailed. However, the chief priests and the crowd were relentless, vehemently accusing Jesus. Pilate, perhaps seeking to avoid a riot or to shift responsibility, then learned Jesus was a Galilean. This gave him an opportunity to send Jesus to Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover. This move was less about a genuine search for truth and more about political maneuvering and avoiding a difficult decision that could have repercussions with both the Jewish leaders and Rome. Herod was initially pleased to see Jesus, hoping to witness a miracle. However, Jesus remained silent before Herod's questioning and the fierce accusations of the chief priests and teachers of the law. Herod, finding no entertainment and perhaps no serious political threat, mocked Jesus with his soldiers, dressed him in an elegant robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Herod, like Pilate, did not find Jesus guilty of any crime deserving death. Instead of upholding justice based on this lack of evidence, Herod treated the situation as a spectacle, further demeaning the pursuit of truth. The truth of Jesus' innocence was becoming increasingly clear to the Roman authorities, yet personal and political interests were overriding any commitment to justice. Back before Pilate, the governor again stated his conviction of Jesus' innocence, proposing to have him flogged and then released. However, the crowd, incited by the chief priests, clamored for Jesus' crucifixion and the release of Barabbas, a man imprisoned for insurrection and murder. Pilate, despite his wife's warning about the innocent man and his own repeated declarations of Jesus' innocence, ultimately succumbed to the pressure. He chose political expediency over truth and justice, symbolically washing his hands but staining them with the blood of an innocent man. The civil trials, like the religious ones, demonstrated a profound contempt for truth when it conflicted with power, ambition, or popular demand. Section 5. Clearing the fog. Understanding what truth is not. To truly grasp what truth is, it's often helpful to first understand what it is not. Many popular ideas about truth are, in fact, misconceptions that can lead us away from a clear understanding. One common error is to think that truth is simply whatever works. This is the basis of pragmatism when taken to an extreme. While true ideas should work in the real world, the fact that something appears to work in a particular situation doesn't automatically make it true. For instance, a deceptive business practice might bring short-term profits, working for the con artist, but it's based on falsehood and ultimately causes harm. Similarly, a placebo might make someone feel better, working in a sense, but the pill itself has no medicinal truth to its healing power. Another prevalent misunderstanding is that truth is merely what the majority believes, or what is culturally accepted. History is replete with examples where the majority held beliefs that were demonstrably false. For centuries, most people believed the sun revolved around the earth. This widespread belief did not make it true. Similarly, various cultures have held practices like human sacrifice or slavery as acceptable, but the cultural acceptance did not make these actions morally true or right. Truth is not determined by a popular vote or by consensus. It stands independent of public opinion. If it were, truth would be as fickle as trends, changing with every generation or geographical location, which is not a stable foundation for anything. Furthermore, truth is not what makes you feel good or what you sincerely believe. Sincerity is valuable, but one can be sincerely wrong. Someone might genuinely believe they can fly by flapping their arms, but jumping off a tall building will have tragic real-world consequences, regardless of their sincerity. Feelings are subjective and can be misleading. They are often influenced by our desires, fears, or upbringing, rather than by objective reality. While truth can sometimes bring comfort, it can also be challenging or unsettling. For example, a medical diagnosis of a serious illness is a hard truth, but knowing it is crucial for seeking treatment, even if it causes initial distress. Finally, it is crucial to distinguish truth from what is comprehensive. While a comprehensive understanding of a subject is always desirable, a statement does not need to encompass every possible detail about something to be true. For instance, the statement, "Paris is the capital of France," is true even though it doesn't tell you about Paris's population, history, or landmarks. A statement is true if it corresponds to reality in the specific claim it makes. Demanding omniscience before we can claim to know any truth would lead to radical skepticism. Truth is about accurate representation of a particular aspect of reality, not necessarily the exhaustive explanation of all reality. These distinctions help us avoid common pitfalls in our quest for understanding what truth genuinely entails. Section 6. Defining reality, philosophical approaches to truth. Philosophers have proposed several theories to define truth, each offering a different lens through which to understand this fundamental concept. The most widely accepted and historically dominant view is the correspondence theory of truth. Simply put, this theory states that a belief or statement is true if it corresponds to reality, or if it accurately describes the way the world actually is. For example, the statement, "There is a book on the table," is true if and only if there is indeed a book on the table. This theory aligns with our common-sense intuition about truth. It posits an objective reality independent of our minds, and truth is achieved when our thoughts or assertions correctly reflect that reality. Another perspective is the coherence theory of truth. This theory suggests that a statement is true if it coheres or fits consistently with a larger system of other accepted beliefs or statements. For instance, in a mathematical system, a theorem is considered true if it can be logically derived from the axioms and other established theorems within that system. While coherence is an important test for truth, as contradictions often signal falsehood, it is not sufficient on its own as a definition of truth. An entire system of beliefs can be internally consistent, coherent, yet still be completely false if it doesn't correspond to external reality. A well-written fantasy novel might be perfectly coherent within its own fictional world, but its statements are not true in the real world. A third view, often misunderstood and sometimes misused, is the pragmatic theory of truth. Philosophers like William James and John Dewey are associated with this theory, which broadly suggests that a belief is true if it works or if it has useful practical consequences. For example, if believing in a certain diet plan leads to better health, a pragmatist might consider that belief to be true because of its positive outcome. However, as discussed earlier, what works can be misleading. Critics argue that pragmatism can devolve into relativism, where truth becomes subjective based on utility for an individual or group. While the practical consequences of a belief can be an indicator of its potential truthfulness, true beliefs generally lead to better outcomes in the long run. Utility itself is not the definition of truth in an objective sense. Ultimately, the correspondence theory provides the most robust and foundational understanding of truth, especially when we are talking about factual claims about the world or historical events, such as the trial of Jesus. It insists on a match between our statements and objective reality. While coherence can help us check for consistency among our true beliefs, and pragmatic outcomes can sometimes offer clues, the core of truth lies in its faithful representation of what is. This understanding is crucial because it anchors truth in reality, preventing it from becoming a mere matter of opinion, utility, or internal consistency without external grounding. Truth, in this robust sense, is something we discover, not something we invent. Section 7. The modern maze: challenges to objective truth. In contemporary society, the very idea of objective truth faces significant challenges from various philosophical perspectives. One of the most pervasive is relativism. Relativism, in its common form, asserts that truth is not absolute or universal, but is relative to individuals, cultures, or historical contexts. A relativist might say that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. This view effectively denies the existence of any objective standard by which to measure the truthfulness of claims. If truth is entirely subjective, then contradictory statements can both be true simultaneously, which defies logic. For instance, if one person says the Earth is round and another says it's flat, relativism might imply both are true for those individuals, which is clearly problematic when dealing with factual reality. Another significant challenge is skepticism. While a healthy dose of skepticism is good, prompting us to question and seek evidence, radical skepticism doubts our ability to know any truth at all. A profound skeptic might argue that since our senses can be deceived and our reasoning can be flawed, we can never be certain about anything. While it's true that attaining absolute certainty on all matters can be difficult, radical skepticism can lead to a paralysis of thought and action. If we cannot know anything for sure, then the pursuit of knowledge, justice, or even simple facts becomes meaningless. It's important to distinguish between acknowledging human limitations in knowing and denying the possibility of knowing any truth whatsoever. Pluralism, in a philosophical sense related to truth, can also pose a challenge when it moves beyond respecting diverse viewpoints to asserting that all viewpoints are equally valid or true. While it's vital in a diverse society to tolerate and understand different perspectives, this does not equate to all perspectives being factually or morally equivalent. For instance, in a scientific debate, multiple hypotheses may be proposed, plurality of views, but they are not all equally true. Evidence and experimentation aim to determine which one best corresponds to reality. Confusing tolerance of different beliefs with the equal truth value of those beliefs can erode the very concept of objective truth, leading to a situation where no claim can be judged as better or more accurate than another. These challenges, relativism, skepticism, and a misapplied pluralism, create an intellectual environment where the pursuit of objective truth can be seen as naive, arrogant, or even oppressive. They foster a climate where personal feelings or group identity can take precedence over evidence and reason. This makes discerning truth more difficult because it undermines the shared understanding that there is a reality to be discerned. However, the very act of arguing for relativism or skepticism often involves making truth claims. For example, it is true that truth is relative, which ironically relies on the non-relative nature of the statement itself. Despite these challenges, the human need for and reliance on objective truth persists in our daily lives and in our most critical endeavors. Section 8. The Indispensable Compass. Why Knowing Truth Matters. Understanding and committing to truth is not merely an abstract philosophical exercise. It is profoundly vital for virtually every aspect of human existence. Truth acts as an indispensable compass, guiding our decisions, shaping our relationships, and forming the bedrock of a just and functional society. Consider the practical implications in everyday life. When you consult a doctor, you expect a truthful diagnosis, as your health and well-being depend on it. When you invest your money, you rely on the truthful representation of financial information. If truth were irrelevant or purely subjective, trust would evaporate, and these fundamental interactions would become impossible or dangerously unreliable. In the realm of justice, truth is paramount. The entire legal system, however flawed in practice, is theoretically built upon the pursuit of truth. Investigations aim to uncover the facts of a case, witnesses swear to tell the truth, and juries are tasked with discerning truth from conflicting testimonies to reach a just verdict. If there is no objective truth about what happened, then concepts like guilt and innocence lose their meaning. Justice becomes arbitrary, dependent on power, persuasion, or prejudice, rather than on what actually transpired. The trials of Jesus serve as a stark reminder of what happens when truth is subverted in legal proceedings. Injustice prevails and the innocent suffer. Furthermore, knowledge of truth is essential for personal growth and societal progress. We learn from true accounts of history to avoid repeating past mistakes. Scientific advancement is driven by the rigorous pursuit of truth about the natural world, testing hypotheses against evidence to arrive at more accurate understandings. In our personal lives, confronting difficult truths about ourselves or our circumstances, while sometimes painful, is often the first step towards positive change and development. Living in denial or basing our lives on falsehoods leads to stagnation, error, and ultimately, disillusionment. Truth provides the firm ground upon which we can build a stable and meaningful life. The importance of truth also extends to our moral framework. If there are no objective moral truths, then distinguishing right from wrong becomes a matter of personal preference or cultural whim. Atrocities could be justified and ethical principles would have no binding force. Concepts like human rights, compassion, and fairness presuppose some underlying moral truths that are universally applicable. Without a commitment to truth, society risks descending into a state where might makes right and the vulnerable are left unprotected. Therefore, acknowledging, seeking, and upholding truth is not just an intellectual pursuit, it is a moral imperative and a practical necessity for human flourishing on both individual and collective levels. Section 9, the ultimate source, Jesus as the embodiment of truth. Having explored the nature of truth, its distortions, and its vital importance, we return to the figure of Jesus Christ, who made the audacious claim, "I am the way and the truth and the life," John 14:6. This statement is not merely a claim to teach truth, but to truth itself. How can a person embody truth? Philosophically, if truth is correspondence to reality, then Jesus, by claiming to be the truth, is asserting that he perfectly corresponds to and reveals ultimate reality, particularly the reality of God and humanity's relationship with him. He presents himself not just as a messenger of true propositions, but as the very substance of truth incarnate. This claim aligns with the correspondence theory. If God is the ultimate reality and the creator of all other realities, then anything that accurately reflects God's nature and his design for creation is true. Jesus, as the Word made flesh, John 1:14, is presented in Christian theology as the perfect revelation of God to humanity. His life, teachings, death, and resurrection are seen as the ultimate disclosure of God's character, his love, his justice, and his plan for redemption. In this sense, Jesus corresponds perfectly to the reality of who God is. To know Jesus, therefore, is to come into contact with the foundational truth about existence, purpose, and our spiritual condition. Furthermore, Jesus' life and teachings exhibit perfect coherence. His words and actions were consistently aligned. He taught love and forgiveness, and he demonstrated it, even to his enemies. He spoke of humility, and he washed his disciples' feet. He claimed divine authority, and he performed works that his contemporaries, and even his detractors, acknowledged as supernatural. This internal consistency and the coherence between his claims and his character lend credibility to his assertion of being the truth. There was no disconnect between what he said and who he was, a hallmark of authentic truthfulness. His teachings provide a coherent worldview that addresses the deepest questions of human existence. Finally, while the pragmatic test for truth can be misused, the transformative impact of Jesus' truth in the lives of millions throughout history can be seen as a powerful, albeit secondary, confirmation. Lives changed, societies reformed for the better when his teachings are genuinely followed, and a profound sense of meaning and purpose discovered by those who embrace him as the truth suggests that his claims have a practical, life-altering power that aligns with ultimate reality. Therefore, when Jesus stood before Pilate, he was not just a man on trial. He was, by his own declaration and as attested by his followers, the very origin and standard of truth, confronting a world often lost in its shadows. He offers himself as the ultimate answer to Pilate's ancient and still urgent question: what is truth?